terms of timings. I've gone through as much as I can to see where I might be able to cut some points down and address them with evidence in chief. I think I'm at about 35 minutes, but it depends how quickly we go. So we were talking about connected street networks, Mr. Lally, and I wanted to put a follow-up point to you about how that fits in overall to the rest of design guidance. So can you please pick up CD 5.6 for me? And page 19 of that document, please. Yeah. So if we look at the right side of that document, there is a diagram that sets out different layouts and grains and scales of buildings in different locations. We can see suburban, edge, etc. But the text at the bottom tells us, doesn't it, that what we should do when we're considering layout, grain, scale of buildings is that we need to draw inspiration from traditional street patterns so that things can sit well effectively in their surrounding context. So there's nothing between us on that. That is something that the guidance tells us to do. The question is, they all... It's not lit up.
I beg your pardon. Yeah, they all show an interconnected grid of streets in different guises.
The question is that the guidance tells us that developments should fit well in their surrounding context. Can we agree that that's the case?
It does say development that fits well with the surrounding context, yeah.
Yeah. Can we go to the DAS, please, which is CD 1.24?
Yeah.
Page 35.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think it's 34, which is the one above. What we can see, can't we, from the image on that page, so what we see there is the site, and it's sort of slotted into the development, existing development adjacent, and we can see there, can't we, easily that cul-de-sacs are a prominent feature, aren't they, of this area of Ashbourne?
Yes.
And to that extent, the proposed scheme is entirely in keeping, isn't it, with that settlement pattern?
It's very much akin, isn't it, to the diagram that is included in my evidence of the branching cul-de-sacs and so forth. Yes, and I think that's what the neighbourhood plan encourages us to move away from, for instance.
But if we start to redesign things that look completely different to what's right next to it, presumably you would then be saying, well, sorry, it doesn't fit within its existing context, wouldn't you? So, can't win.
I think you need to take inspiration, don't you, from doing a thorough character assessment of the town and the surrounding area, and I don't see evidence that that's been done.
At paragraph 4.21 of your main proof, Mr. Lally, you make points about accessibility. Now, we've already dealt with that in highways evidence, and I'm not going to repeat those points, but I just want to understand this. You reference the National Model Design Code, which is CD 5.7, and you quote a reference, an extract from it, and you included in that reference is how safe the walk feels. And I just want to be absolutely clear, is there anything between us on whether or not the access road, the spine road through this development would feel safe? Is that a point you're taking or not?
No, I've just quoted the whole sentence from the design code.
Yeah. That's helpful because it is a positive feature of the design, isn't it, that actually the housing largely addresses that frontage, and therefore we've got passive surveillance, and that will create a feeling of safety, won't it?
It does face up to the road, but as I've said before, at the expense of facing away from all the surrounding residual publicly accessible open spaces.
Yeah, I understand that's your point, Mr. Lally, but the question is, the fact that those houses address the road and the street frontage means that it will provide passive surveillance, and that's a positive thing, isn't it, in design terms, in terms of safety?
Yes, the buildings do face up to the street, that's correct.
So you then move on in your evidence to deal with what you refer to as townscape and architectural character. Mm-hmm. You can just go to paragraph 4.22, please.
Yep.
But actually, in large part, really, we're talking about 2 points that you make. Firstly, standard house types, and secondly, finishing materials. Have I got the gist of what you're saying there correct?
Yes, there's an overall sort of homogeneous sort of standardisation to the approach, a pretty standard cul-de-sac, pretty standard house types, and as the neighbourhood plan says, it has the feeling of an anywhere type estate.
Can we go to the DAS, please, at CD 1.24? Page 19, please.
Yep.
Again, in terms of surrounding context, if we look at page 19, the top photo, we can see there we've got red brick houses and we've got grey roofs. And to that extent, the scheme, the proposed finish to the scheme in terms of materials respects its surrounding context, doesn't it?
There's definitely some similarities with the Red Row scheme, yes. And what I also note on that page in terms of local character is that there are 2 specific references included as inspiration for the character. One is the historic core of Ashbourne, and the second is rather peculiarly the houses along Lady Hole Lane, which is a lane east of the town, on the far east of the town in Ashbourne. I was perplexed as to why that should be a key reference for local character. So,
sorry, Mr. Lally, again, where is that in your proof of evidence? Because I'm pretty sure that's a new point, is it not?
No, it's there in my proof of evidence.
Lady Hall Lane?
Yeah. So, in my rebuttal, I paragraph 2.3 of my rebuttal. 2 paragraphs are provided on...
Lady Hole Lane.
Lady Hole Lane.
Yeah, okay.
2 paragraphs are provided on page 19 of the DAS referencing the historic core of Ashbourne and the houses along Lady Hole Lane before going to make some general statements about recent developments.
Sorry, Mr. Lally, let's just be absolutely clear. Your response to me, and this is getting incredibly frustrating, I'm afraid, but your response to me is that it was peculiar that Lady Hole Lane had been referenced. But that's not what paragraph 2.3 says, is it? You refer to Lady Hole Lane, you don't comment on whether that's peculiar or otherwise, and now you're providing that in evidence in response to Cross.
I say very little evidence is provided that local character has been acknowledged, understood and drawn upon in shaping the design, because Lady Hole Lane de facto is not local to the area. It's on the far eastern side of the town.
I'm not going to engage in new points that are being raised in Cross, so let's move on. The local context immediate to the site, it's quite right, isn't it, that the proposed appearance and materials are entirely consistent with it, aren't they?
They're pretty consistent with the Red Row development to the north. What they're not consistent with is the guidelines that are in...
That's not the question, and we're going to go to the guidelines and the landscape character assessment if that's where you're going. Is that where you're going? Because I'm going to move on to that. I'm not trying to be unfair, but we're trying to move along and get finished today.
The site sits within a defined character area. There are architectural materials that have been identified that are specific to that character area, and I'm just making that point.
And I was about to say, and you point to the LCA, don't you, in your evidence? Let's go to the landscape character assessment, please.
You remind us which reference that is?
I think you might have it. Is it? It's CD 6.27, because there is a point between us on this, before we get into the detail.
Yeah.
Firstly, Mr. Lally, you identify the wrong landscape type, don't you?
I do. It's within the character area is correct, but I've misinterpreted some of the formatting here. However, the material point is exactly the same, because there's there's a very similar statement that is provided in relation to the correct character type, which is on the digital page 140, I believe it is.
What this document does not do, does it, is make any recommendations about what palette choices should be made in any proposed development schemes.
No, it doesn't. It's not formatted as recommendations. It draws reference to certain features that are characteristic of the area. So on digital page 151 of the PDF, it states for this particular area, the predominant building material is a warm red brick with Staffordshire blue clay tiles. Some local reddish sandstone is also used, usually for more important buildings like parish church and manor houses. So it's really asking oneself whether there's been any reference to that, whether there's any, if the design draws any inspiration from the local characteristics of the area.
Mr. Lally, if there were, and let's just try and shortcut this rather than going round the houses, excuse the pun. If there was any real concern about the materials in terms of finishing, colouring, what should and shouldn't be used, then quite frankly that can be dealt with by condition, can't it?
The whole approach is...
Sorry, can I have an answer to the question, Mr. Lally? Can it be dealt with by condition?
I'm sure materials can be defined in conditions, yes.
We can put the landscape character assessment away. You then move on at paragraph 422 to 423 of your main proof, and you talk about house types and standardised house types, and you make reference to identikit non-places. Just want to ask some questions about placemaking in the first instance, Mr. Lally. Can we agree that placemaking is more than just what house types you use?
Yes.
Can we agree that strong green infrastructure is a part of placemaking?
Yes.
Can we agree that strong green infrastructure is a part of this scheme?
Yes.
Can we agree that respecting and protecting the landscape is part of placemaking?
Yes.
Can we agree that conserving and improving biodiversity is part of placemaking?
Yes.
And all of those things contribute to a strong sense of place, don't they?
They are influencing factors on that, yeah.
Yeah. And this scheme ticks all of those boxes that I've just run through, doesn't it?
It has a lot of those characteristics, yes.
Can we just turn up house types at CD 2.27? So this is the most recent house type pack.
Yep.
Where in your evidence can I find any reference to the use of split level houses?
I don't make reference to split level houses.
They are a bespoke design for this scheme, aren't they?
You're asserting that. I don't know.
Okay.
How bespoke or otherwise they are.
I'll ask Mr. Carr to deal with that. CD 212, please, if you can turn that up. So this is a letter from Woodall Holmes, the appellant, to the council about amendments to the scheme and design updates. You can let me know when you have it.
I've got it, thank you.
So if you just go to the third page, please, there's a top paragraph that starts, a liversidge is now proposed at.
Yeah.
That's just to orientate. And then if we go down 2, 3, 4 paragraphs down, we see there, don't we, discussing plots 23 to 53, that in response to a request, stone copings have been removed from a particular house type, and one house type has been omitted altogether. We also see there that there is a variation of the Trowbridge house type that's been designed specifically for this scheme. Those all indicate that it's not just a one-size-fits-all. There has been a bespoke design response to this scheme, hasn't there, Mr. Lally?
No, I really don't think it's bespoke. You've cited the Trowbridge, for instance. In my evidence, I've shown the Trowbridge being used at least in 2 other schemes, and it's very, very similar.
If we go over to the 4th page of the letter, please. Sorry?
2.12.
There's a comment at the top there about the quad blocks, if you have that. And what we can see there is that, again, in conjunction with officers, what's happened here is that there's been hipped and roof pitch plots reduced. So we've basically tailored the roof design to officer requirements. We've introduced gables, and then we've provided interest and detail in a symmetrical format, whilst hip roof arrangements provides for a feature building. Again, that's all about bespoke amendments, isn't it, to standard house types?
I mean, to be so minor as to be de minimis. I mean, this is lipstick on a gorilla. I think these quad types are really very, very poor indeed in the living environment that they provide people with. North-facing, single aspect, no private space, and very, very basic in their appearance. They happen to constitute the affordable housing, which is shunted right to the end of the development.
Mr. Lally, I'm going to come on to those parts of your proof. That's not what I'm asking you about at the moment. We're talking about house types and whether or not there have been bespoke reflections of those house types in this scheme at the request of officers. And the answer clearly, isn't it, from CD 212, that the answer has to be yes.
I would not describe this as bespoke. I think it's taking a standard and doing some very minor changes.
Can I just understand this, Lally? Where in your evidence do you make any reference to or engage at all with the amount of dialogue that was undertaken between the appellants and the council's officers on design?
I don't make any reference to that.
So, part B then, please, of your proof of evidence. Green open spaces that are left over. You say that the houses turn their backs on green open spaces. And what I want to do is just go to Mr. Carr's appendices from his main proof, please.
Can you remind us of the reference, please?
I don't know what the CD number is, I'm afraid. Can somebody, is anyone able to help?
Mr. Carr's original proof of evidence.
Yeah, it's the appendices to his proof of evidence.
Yeah, I've got a copy here.
Or document 710.
Okay.
Can we also have CD 2.28 as well? So have both of those available to you. Because what Mr. Carr does in his visuals, in his appendices, so we've got view A, view B, and view C, is aptly demonstrate that actually the houses do not turn their backs on these green open spaces throughout the scheme. They address them, don't they?
They address they address the road, yes.
Mr. Lally, this is going to get even more protracted if we can't be sensible about what these visuals show. So if we look at view A, what we can see on the right-hand side and to the left is public open space, can't we? Green public open space on both sides of the road. Yes or no?
Sorry, I've got too many tabs open. I beg your pardon.
Okay.
Could you let me know the reference again? I do beg your pardon.
It's the appendices to Mr. Carr's evidence.
Core document 7.10.
710.
So there's two of them. There's the proof and then the appendices. So it's
710A, thank you. Right, gotcha.
So we've got three visuals. We've got view A, we've got view B, and we've got view C. Can we agree in all of those visuals what we see here is housing directly addressing the green open space within the scheme?
Yes, yes.
So they don't turn their backs on the green open space within the scheme, do they?
They don't turn their backs on this particular open space within the scheme, no.
And if we go to CD 2.28, we've got view 3, please.
Yes.
That's also open space that the houses do not turn their back on, that's correct, isn't it?
Yes, that's the focal space in the middle, yeah.
Yeah. We've also got view 8, and we can see that we've got houses directly overlooking public green open space there also, haven't we?
Yes.
We also have it on view 9.
Mm.
10 and 11.
Yeah, very largely on 9. I think we've got an exposed rear garden fence, haven't we? Or no, it's the side of a garage, isn't it? On view 9, right in the middle there, it looks like it's the side of a garage, isn't it? In between those two houses. And
in between the houses, but sorry, Mr. Lally, the houses front on to the green open space,
yes, yes.
Don't they?
Yes.
And the same goes for 10 and 11.
Yes.
There's simply no evidence, is there, that green open spaces, public space in this development, is not addressed by the houses. The development doesn't turn its back on it. The key focal areas are provided directly with passive surveillance by houses addressing those areas.
When you say there's no evidence, shall we turn our attention to the spread in the DAS, which is page 40 and 41, for instance. What we can see there is that, as stated in my proof of evidence, the characteristic of the development is indeed that the houses face up to and front onto the street, but at the expense of turning away from the adjacent, the immediate adjacent publicly accessible green open space, and not facing up to the views to the valley beyond.
So Mr. Lally, this is just another example of you trying to twist and turn in terms of your evidence says that the public open space provided by this development, not existing, is not addressed by houses, and that houses turn their back to it. The inspector asked you questions about it. Because I've now demonstrated that that indeed isn't the case, now we're talking about other areas, are we? Let's be clear what we're talking about, please.
Can I just draw attention to paragraph 2.8 of my rebuttal? And I state that whereas buildings do turn their front to the street, in many instances they turn their back to the adjacent publicly accessible green open space, which also constitutes public realm.
But Mr. Lally, you were asked to identify those areas in the inspector's questions.
And which is what I've done.
You're talking about different places now, aren't you, to the answers that you gave previously? As I understand it now, if we can have a plan, what you're talking about is the existing landscape planting on the edge of the site to the south, and that houses turn their backs on there.
If we could take any plan, we can take this one for instance. What we see is the development lining the road, and all of the residual open space adjacent to that, the development turns away from. So all of these spaces are lined by back gardens. All of these, everything here is lined. So rather than look at the way that landscape is integrated into the development, it's very much sort of a residual afterthought. It's space left over. It's not integrated. It's turned away from.
I'm going to ask Mr. Carr and Mr. Jackson to give their views on that, Mr. Lally. I'm not going to take it any further. CD 5.4. I think, no, I don't need to go there actually. I can leave that over. Let's move on to street trees, please. Your paragraph 4.30.
Yes.
The main proof, yeah. And we need to have a hand in the MPPF. We need to update the reference because it's 136, not 131. Before we get into what the MPPF does or doesn't say, let me understand this. I think in your evidence in chief, and you can be forgiven for not exactly remembering, but my note of what you told us there was that the streets should be traditional tree-lined streets. I wasn't able to understand exactly what you meant by that. Can you just explain what you mean by traditional tree-lined streets, please?
Yes, certainly. So if we look at CD 2.23, for instance, we can see the planning layout. And what we see on the planning layout is certainly a series of half a dozen trees to the east of the development, on the eastern side of the development. We then see some trees placed, a sprinkling of trees placed in the middle. There's a big gap with no trees at all in between, and then there's some placed at the end. So traditionally, when we think of a tree-lined street, there is a degree of consistency, there's an integrity to the approach. Here we see it sporadic at best.
You provided any examples of where in Ashbourne we can find what you consider to be a traditional tree-lined street, Mr. Lally?
I have not.
Back to your proof then, please. Paragraph 4.30. I need that. You say that in your first sentence, all streets should be tree-lined. That's not what paragraph 136 says, is it, of the MPPF? That's something that you've inserted. word all.
That's correct.
You've also inserted the word continuous, haven't you?
Yes, the actual text says that planning policies and decisions should ensure that new streets are tree lined. So we should ensure.
There's nothing in the guidance that says it's got to be continuous, is there?
The word continuous isn't used, no.
You also say, you mention a plan, I think it's one of the ecology plans potentially, I'm not sure, but you go to a document number 11008 FPCR XXXXDRL001. You've just made a mistake there, haven't you, Mr. Lally? Because actually, if we go to CD 2.24, which is the adoptable area plan, we can see that all of the street trees are actually within the adopted highway.
I'm happy to. I've since looked at the details that you're identifying there, and I'm happy to see that that is the case. But I think you'd agree that if we went to CD 2.23 planning layout, it really doesn't give that impression at all. So if we have that clarity via the more detailed drawing, that's fine.
And in any event, it could have been conditioned, couldn't it, Mr. Lally?
I mean, really, I think if you either have a continuous, robust and beautiful tree-lined street as a key part of your design philosophy, or you don't. So yes, some of the details that could be conditioned, but what I'm highlighting is that the overall design strategy doesn't seem to embrace it.
Yeah, I understand that that's your view, and obviously that's the point between the council and the appellant. Mr. Carr will give his view, and I'm not going to cross-examine you any further on that. In respect to segregation of affordable housing then, can we go to CD 2.23? The planning layout.
Yep.
Can you look down the right-hand side, please, and the key on the plan? And we can see that there are red dots that indicate the provision of affordable homes, specifically for rental.
Yes.
Yeah, and we've also got starter homes and first homes.
Yes.
We can see, can't we, because of the dots and the colours, that they are indeed pepper potted through the scheme, aren't they?
Most certainly not. I wouldn't describe the rented provision as pepper potted at all. I would say that they're in two discernible areas, and the particular area that concerns me is the quad block area, which is the far extremity of the development.
Okay, so we can't agree that. Fine, I'll ask Mr. Carr to deal with that. It is indeed the fact, though, isn't it, that that type of housing is not just found in that location, it's also found elsewhere in the scheme, isn't it? Can we at least agree that much? We can see that we've got 3 red dots. We're going from the entrance, we're going down the spine road. We have some development that fronts onto the red row existing open space on one side, so that addresses that open space there. In the next sort of block, where we've got houses on both sides of the road, we can see there, can't we, that we've got rented housing. The 3 red dots.
Yes, but it's clearly not the same type, is it? Yeah. It's a very different type.
So can we just have an answer to the question, and then by all means
you specifically asked me if there was the same type, and I would highlight that no, the quad blocks are a discernibly different type.
Mr. Lally, that's not what the question was. I said there are rented houses there, aren't there?
No, okay. There are rented houses there, but you specifically said type.
Yeah, and the type I'm talking about is the rented affordable, Mr. Lally.
Oh, not the house types.
No, because I've not gone on to that point yet. So it's just not correct, is it, to say that rented affordable housing is confined to the far end. Your paragraph 4.32 is incorrect, as a matter of fact.
I mean, the sentence in its entirety talks about them being easily distinguishable from their private for sale neighbours.
Mr. Lally, can I have an answer to the question?
There are 3 other affordable houses elsewhere in the development. I was particularly drawing attention to the quad blocks. The whole section is entitled quad blocks, and that's what I'm focusing the attention on in my proof of evidence.
CD 5.6, please. Let's just look at the definition of tenure neutral, please, in the National Design Guide. Hopefully there is nothing between us on this, given that it's in the guidance. Page 36. It tells us that tenure neutral means housing where no group of residents is disadvantaged as a result of the tenure of their homes, no segregation or difference in quality between tenures by siting, accessibility, environmental conditions, external facade or materials, in equally attractive and beneficial locations, no differentiation in positions of entrances, shared open or play spaces are accessible regardless of tenure. So there's nothing between us on the definition, is there, Mr. Lally?
No.
In terms of that definition for tenure neutral, it's not a requirement, is it, that affordable housing must have its own private garden?
It's not a prerequisite, no.
Can we go to CD 2.28, please?
Yeah.
I want to look at View 9, View 10 and View 11. I'm in CD 2.28, Ma'am. It's the 3D Visuals Pack, the most up-to-date version, September 2023. And I want to ask about View 10 and 11 in particular, because View 10 and 11 are of the quad blocks, aren't they?
Yes.
And it's quite clear if you compare this to the layout, Mr. Lally, then we can see that actually these quad blocks have been sited to take optimum advantage of the green heart of the scheme, haven't they?
The ones on the southerly face onto this space, but what I find genuinely quite shocking is that they're back-to-back types with those single aspect homes north-facing on the back of the view here with no sunlight whatsoever. And no private amenity space, no sunlight, and discernibly of a lower standard in that sense than their for sale equivalents.
Mr. Lally, if we look at these visuals, what we can see, can't we, is that the detail and design is entirely consistent, isn't it?
By design, you're referring to you're confining the point to aesthetics, and the point that I raise in my proof of evidence is broader than that.
Yeah, I understand that, Mr. Lally, but I'm asking questions in the way I'm asking them for a reason, and it would be helpful to just have an answer. The detail and the design, in aesthetic terms, if you would like to qualify it, is entirely consistent, isn't it, with the rest of the development?
I wouldn't say it is consistent. Elsewhere, there has been some attempt with the placement of white buildings to denote more important corners and so forth. There's nothing that has been introduced for these quad blocks that seeks to make them special or characterful or, so I can't agree with that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lally. It's about tenure blind, not making them special. They're red brick and they've got grey roofs, and they are, to all intents and purposes, the same external appearance as the vast majority of the rest of the houses that are proposed for this site, aren't they? I mean, we can see it from the house type pack.
You're certainly drawing reference to the homogeneous nature of the development, and to that extent I would agree with you that there's a homogeneity throughout that is pretty poor.
I still don't have an answer to the actual question. I'm going to move on. It's fair to say, isn't it, that the quad blocks are well placed to access the open space in this development, the Green Heart? Yes or no?
Yes.
Finally, a direct question to an answer.
Direct question.
You use the language in your proof of pared back design. You don't give any explanation for that in your actual evidence, do you, Mr. Lally? You just use the phrase. You don't explain what you mean by that anywhere.
What I do is I include an appendix with very similar house types that have been utilised on schemes elsewhere, and I draw reference to those to show just how little of sort of tailor making there is to this particular site.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Law, you can't have it both ways. You can't say they all look the same, but when it comes to the affordable houses, it's not tenure blind. That's a mutually inconsistent position, isn't it?
No, you were particularly talking about how the development had consistently grey roofs, tiles, and I was agreeing with you in the points you were making that there's a homogeneity, a consistency of design material that's used throughout the development. I don't think that's a good thing, but I was agreeing with your observation.
It's actually, in terms of external appearance and design and materials, Mr. Lally, it's very challenging to spot the difference, isn't it, with respect to the tenure of the affordable housing. They are tenure blind. All of the same materials are being used. You can't spot the difference, can you?
No, design is a three-dimensional thing. It's not just about... So I think it's absolutely clear that the design types that are used for these quad blocks are discernibly different and of a much lower status and quality than their private equivalents elsewhere within the development.
Going back to the definition that we looked at previously, there is no differentiation, is there, in the position of entrances on the quad blocks?
No, they have. Well, there is insofar as, you know, these that are shown in the view here, they all face south onto the street. But but we then have the north-facing on the back, and that is different, isn't it? There's no other house type in this housing scheme that has a single aspect north-facing layout with a frontage solely focused to the north, with no sunlight whatsoever. It's quite shocking.
They appear as two-storey houses, don't they, Mr. Lally?
Yes.
Where in your evidence do you provide any assessment of what light or otherwise these dwellings will have access to, other than generally saying, well, they're north-facing? Where is your evidence, Mr. Lally?
Ms. Ogley, they're north-facing. They have no windows other than on the north elevation. De facto, that is the case.
Yeah. Where is your evidence about passive ventilation and lighting, Mr. Lally, other than your reference to north-facing?
They are back-to-back. The wall that dividing the properties is impermeable. De facto, there cannot be any passive ventilation across that threshold.
Just give them a nudge. Anything else? No. So I'm not going to go any further with it, Ma'am. It's just we're not getting anywhere. So I'm going to stop there, and I will ask Mr. Carr to address the points.
Thank you.
Did you want to re-examine?
Good afternoon.
I've not got a great deal of questions, but I have a few. Just going back to something that you were asked about earlier, you asked about whether working with the existing topography, amongst other things, would help achieve a positive relationship with the landscape, and you said it would. In fact, it's essential. Can I just ask you to comment on the extent to which that has been achieved in the following respects? First of all, could you take up the design and access statement, the core document 1.24?
Yeah.
And you have it go to pages 50 and 51,
Yes.
where we see some visualisations of the rear gardens and what appears to be the southern side of the Long Spine Road.
Yes.
And then over the page, the text in relation, and some more images from, I think, the street side. Then the text, where it says the most important consideration has been topography. It's been an opportunity, considered as an opportunity as much as a constraint. And then the penultimate bullet point under key principles is gardens running uphill will require some retaining features, but have been carefully designed to ensure they're minimised by responding positively to the topography. Could I just have your comment on that, on the extent to which the use of retaining features here has helped or otherwise relate the development to its landscape successfully?
I think what saddens me is that this particular part of the world has a real tradition in working with these slopes, with beautiful subtleties of walls and fences and visual variation, and what we see here is utterly crude. There's no attempt to do that whatsoever, and one can see the implication.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms, and apologies, because I think this question I'm going to probably come back to again because it arose in a different guise later on, but the same issue in relation to, or the same question, sorry, in relation to the issue of dwellings turning their back on open spaces. I'm going to try and merge it with something you asked later on. I wrote this before lunch, and so I'm going to try and put them together so I don't have to ask it twice. Could you take up the layout plan, which is core document 2.23?
Yeah.
And of course, what more recently you were taken to some of the visualizations, and it was said, well, here we can see an open space that is being addressed by the buildings, and I think you agreed, in at least the majority of instances, you could see that. So I just wondered if you could, but I just wondered if you could identify, I think you may have done already, but maybe not very clearly, but for the inspectors now, where you say that hasn't been done on this plan.
Should we rove around the development? So we enter the development via the east,
yeah,
and we move westwards. And I would say for the eastern part of the development, that is there is a positive relationship. The houses are clearly oriented to the residual open spaces on the northern side. As we move further west, what one sees is that because a sort of a standard depth has been used for back gardens, there's a sort of a residual open space starting to manifest itself. And to the north and to the south, there are these awkward interfaces with publicly accessible open space and the back larchboard timber fencing. Around the play area, there is certainly an attempt to do that. There's a corner unit that has been introduced on the western side of the play area, which is good. There's the development to the south faces up, but again on the western side, on the entire southerly edge and on the entire northerly edge, one can see that as that there's just these residual spaces and a very harsh interface between a standard timber fence and the open space beyond, rather than regarding those spaces as a positive attribute and actually to integrate more fully into the design of the development.
Okay, thank you. Could you go next, please? I'm trying to remember the document, core document CD 2.29, which I think is the general arrangement of the landscaping.
Yep.
Just a question about the counting trees. I just want to be clear about this. If I can find this up, sorry, if I can pull it up. Where are we? There we go. If we just look in the schedule of I think it was a figure of nearly 3,000 that was a revised figure down from the 6,000 that was given when it was put to you. Just to be clear.
Sorry, can I just be clear just on this? The figure that's current is what's in Mr. Jackson's rebuttal proof, so it's 2497, I think.
Sorry, okay, apologies.
Sorry,
nearly
just
2,400 or 2,500. Just in terms of the breakdown of that, how many of them are individual trees and how much is planting in areas of woodland or woodland edge?
There are, under the individual trees category, there are 110 trees identified.
Okay, thank you. And next, you asked, this is just to ask, you seem to be about to say something, this is why I'm asking this question. There was a point about materials and whether or not it could be dealt with by condition. I think you said yes and started to say something, and then we moved on to the next question. I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if you wanted to say something, say it now.
I suppose it goes to the core of the points I'm trying to get across in my evidence, that a more bespoke approach to design isn't just about taking a standard typology and then elevating it with some minor adjustments in relation to materials. It's actually thinking about the bespoke. It's actually tailoring more convincingly than that. And then the specific point that I was making was that the specific materials that are cited as characteristic of this area was a warm, I think it was mellow was the adjective, warm, mellow red brick and a Staffordshire blue tile. Now, that's, I'm not saying one has to use a Staffordshire blue tile, but actually some demonstration that there's some understanding of the local characteristic and seeing that as an influence and a source of inspiration would be good. But we're not seeing that at all. We're seeing this homogeneous approach.
So let me just ask this, put it this way around. If you are to achieve a well-designed development in accordance with national and local planning policy and guidance, what is the correct approach? Is it one which leaves everything to conditions in particular?
No, absolutely not. It's not a post hoc kind of consideration. It's got to be absolutely integral to the design proposition from the outset.
Thank you. Placemaking. You're taken through some of the characteristics. It said that places with or developments with a sense of place have. I think it was working well with the ecology, working with the existing landscaping, planting, and so forth. And you agreed yes, and you said it has a lot of those characteristics. By contrast, then, can I ask you what are the key points in terms of why you say it lacks sense of place? This development lacks sense of place.
I mean, it's certainly got a quantum of green open space. I don't think anyone can refute the quantum. But is there any special treatment? Is there any real design sophistication in the landscape design of the open space? No, I wouldn't say there is. I would say the vast majority of open spaces that are provided within the development appear to be left over.
Okay. Can I just ask you a question in connection then with the highways evidence, and you were taken to Mr. Carey's evidence at one point, and there is obviously an issue which is disputed between the parties as to the extent to which it might be necessary to cut back retained landscape or retained trees and so forth in order to accommodate highway improvements. If it were necessary to remove them, what effect would that have on the design quality of the development?
Did we have a
I don't really have anything very precise.
distance? We didn't have anything precise. So it's difficult for me to say with certainty the exact nature of it, but what we can see by looking at the general arrangement drawing 2.29 is that it's pretty tight over on the eastern side, and that it would certainly have it would certainly appear to result in the loss of existing vegetation, and conceivably having to change the nature of the buildings in that area.
Okay, thank you. Now, amendment of house types, it was put to you, well, look, no, it isn't simply an anywhere design in terms of architectural character. We have liaised with the planning authority, look at the correspondence, and we've made changes to these standard house types. And you said they were so minor as, I think it's, well, at least some of them you said were so minor as to be negligible or trivial or something of that sort. Could you just pick up your Appendix A where you look at this?
Yeah.
And if you could, I think, in relatively brief form, but obviously pick out anything significant. Just go through that and say, could you illustrate that point by reference to the plans and drawings we see here?
Okay, sure. So we start with the Ashbourne. We can see that the plan, in plan form, it's almost exactly the same. On occasion, it's flipped, but it's exactly or very close to similar. And then, in terms of elevation, what we can see is that sort of the awnings above the door is different in one, but the same in the other, and there could be some. It's difficult with these artist impressions, but different brick types or potentially different roof tiles. If we move to the Ashbourne. Sorry, that's another Ashbourne over there. If we move to the Buckingham, again, I think the Buckingham in the Orchards, North East Derbyshire, is pretty much, if not exactly the same as the Buckingham in Chesterfield. I'm struggling to see difference there. There may be some very minor. In Matlock, there's certainly a different material used in terms of the cladding or the brick. I can't quite tell what that actually is. The Ashbourne, again, so what we see throughout is that fundamentally it's a plonk, 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 plonk. It's using the same type, and then some very minor tweaks which seem sort of tokenistic at best.
Thank you. Tree-lined streets. It was put to you that where you refer to trees needing to be continuous, that was an interpolation. It's not explicitly stated in MPPF, I think, was it 136? Okay, can I just have, for the inspector, what is your understanding of the meaning of tree-lined street in MPPF paragraph 136? In particular, is it a street which only has, I think your words were, trees on one side at various points sporadically along the road, or is it something else?
No, I think obviously there's tremendous variety in what we can envisage to be tree-lined streets, but in our collective mind's eye, when we talk about a tree-lined street, I believe that there's a continuity, there's a consistency of approach. It's not 6 trees here big gap, another couple here, big gap, another, 3 or 4 over here. It's actually running the trees along the continuity of the street.
Continuity, okay. Obviously, we can make submissions on that, and I'll deal with it with Mr. Khan most likely. There is the other aspect of that was put to you is that you said all, and you agreed that was your word as well. What we see in 136 is this: planning policies and decisions should ensure that new streets are tree-lined and that opportunities are taken to incorporate trees elsewhere in developments, etc., etc. Then there is a footnote after tree-lined which says, unless in specific cases there are clear, justifiable and compelling reasons why this would be inappropriate. Have you seen any such justification in any of the appellant's evidence?
No.
Thank you. Finally then, in relation to the quad blocks and whether they are tenure neutral, you were taken to core document 5.6. Could you just go back to that, please? Page 36, 5.6. It's core document 5.6. And you were asked a lot of questions about the appearance and whether that was any materially different from the appearance of market housing. I'm not going to go over that, but we see there in the definition, it doesn't just refer to external facade and materials. It says there's no segregation or difference in terms of quality between tenures by citing accessibility and environmental conditions as well. In respect of those three factors, what's your position? Is there any segregation or difference in quality between quad blocks?
In terms of sunlight, in terms of amenity space, clearly, in my view, the residents are disadvantaged compared to the residents in the private dwellings elsewhere in the development.
In terms of accessibility?
Accessibility, I mean, it's at the farthest end of the development, so it's furthest away from the bus stops and to other local amenities.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mum. Those are my questions.
Can I just clear something up? Because it seems to me I've been told one thing and then something else days later comes along that's different. If I remember this correctly, you were asking Mr. Lally about whether the visibility display would have an impact on the landscaping on that corner.
Yeah, I think it was the tree removal, which, rather than the visibility displays, that Mr. Carey's evidence contested. But Mr. Carey's evidence was that in order to bring the speed limit further south, you would need to widen the road and make other improvements, which might require some land take, not the achievement of the visibility display.
Oh, right, okay.
I did consider whether to object because nothing's been led on that and it's not in Mr. Lally's evidence and there isn't any evidence, but I just thought I'd deal with it by submission.
I think at this stage it's probably wise, and then I can consider it then and draw it all together. Yeah.
It was raised in the Highways evidence, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Lally.
Thank you.
Right, I think we need to have a serious talk about our agenda. You know what's funny is, I'm sure I can say this, a member of the public said to me on the first day, firstly, before it even started, why is it a draft? And number two, it's rather broad, my timetable. Well, perhaps people will know now why it's always a draft and why it's so broad, because everything I write down is never stuck to, and I'm currently on version 7, and that's still not correct. And I don't think we've even done 7 days. So that's about an average of 2 drafts a day. Okay. Now, at the latest, we want to be here at 6 at the latest. We can't go beyond 6. We have 3 1.5-hour sessions left. I'm not good at maths, but that's not going to happen, is it? So we've got an hour from Mr. Jackson.
We do. I mean, we'll be as brief as we can with Mr. Jackson, and we'll try and get it done in 45 minutes.
Well, the only query I have on that is, and I refrained with Mr. Lally, there are points I want to pick up, and it's better I pick them up
Of course.
with your side. So we don't want to brush through it
Yeah, understood.
it's probably better I ask questions at examination chief stage
I
rather than
agree.
cross-examination. So we may need space for that as well. So that's going to take us till 4, I would say, easily. And then we're talking 5. So at most, I think we're going to hear examination chief from Mr. Jackson and Mr. Khan. That's probably all we can manage today.
I think, Mr. Jackson, I think, Mr. Hunter, you indicated 45 minutes cross as well, so I'm not sure we'll make it onto, that's not on there, I think, at the moment, yeah.
Did you say 45-minute
I
cross?
said 45 minutes to an hour. I'll try and stay at the bottom end of that, but for caution I said an hour.
So we've got an hour to do Mr. Jackson, so that's going to take us till 4. Then we're going to cross-examine him, that's going to take us till 5. We're not going to get on to Mr. Carr, are we?
I don't think so, ma'am. There still is the outstanding question of whether or not we can not call Mr. Hoy. There's some work to be done between myself and my learned friend on that, which might save us some time later in the week. There's also that possibility, I think Mr. Hunter was taking instructions about moving the round table to a virtual session potentially.
And I think, as I understood, the appellant's witness has difficulties. I'm not sure that was mentioned before, but it may be a stand-in. I don't think we have any. I think the only thing was to ask whether Mr. Hayes is able to attend next week. I imagine. I think subject to that, if I say yes, subject to Mr. Hayes having a problem, that wouldn't be a problem. Can I also say I don't think he is the council's housing land supply witness who provided the rebuttal. Mr. Roberts, I think, for the appellant may not be the one who appears. Can I also say, bitter experiences told me not to be too optimistic about things, especially in this inquiry, but I do think it is likely that flood risk and drainage will not take its allotted time. I find it difficult to see how it will take quite as long as it has at the moment. So I'm hopeful we can make some time with that.
I know, don't be optimistic yet. I am an eternal optimist. I can't believe we're still on design. I honestly can't believe. But we have to do what we've got to do the job. So, housing land supply. My question is this: we agreed a range. Our range broadened in that one side went lower, one. But we still have a range.
We do still have a range.
So can we not agree the range?
Well, I think we were content to do that. We were content to do that, but the appellant, as I understood, it wasn't. The difficulty now is, the main dispute is over sites which have planning permission. So there are not sites which the planning authority is minded to say are not deliverable, because we have the presumption of deliverability in our favour on those, and we think there are even specific reasons why they are deliverable. So the difficulty is now, having gone there with it. I'll take instructions well, because I understand the point, and that was our position, I think, originally, which is that the range, it doesn't really matter in the range, and it may be. I say I don't want to say too much, but it might be that if we have a discussion about it, we can arrive at I don't know, we can try and arrive at an agreed range which everybody can live with to put in front of you.
Do you agree?
I agree that I don't see any reason. I'll need to just take instructions. I don't see any reason why we can't agree the range.
I think that would help free us up towards the end of this, once we make headway and get over the brow of the hill with evidence. Okay. It's certainly something that, your planning balances are going to cover it to a degree. So I think it would be helpful if we can agree a range, which was the original premise in the CMC. Okay, all right. Right, yeah. Gosh, I didn't even notice you moved, Mr. Jackson. I'm assuming you are Mr. Jackson, not just some random. Okay, all right. Do you want a small break just before you
That would be
start?
very helpful, actually, Mum, thank you.
What would suit you best?
Just 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, so 5 past?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're a chartered member of the Landscape Institute and a senior director in FPCR. The practice is a member of the Landscape Institute and Institute of IEMA and the Urban Design Group. You've been a partner and director of the practice for 24 years. You have over 32 years experience of landscape and development projects from initial concept design to final completion and long-term aftercare. You're involved in site selection, constraints analysis, EIA, detailed landscape design, and you've advised on landscape and visual impacts on a wide range of developments. Is that all correct?
It is.
You've undertaken greenbelt, settlement and strategic gap and green wedge studies, presented on these and landscape, visual and design matters at planning appeals and local plan examinations. You then, in the past year, have been responsible for the coordination and production of a series of VIAs, landscape and green infrastructure strategies, landscape master plans, and you're currently leading on master planning, environmental impact assessment and landscape services on the first round of garden villages at Grantham. Is that all correct?
It is.
And FPCR acts as a consultant to government bodies, Homes England, Natural England, and a consultant to many local authorities, and have received Landscape Institute awards for projects carried out on behalf of Cambridge County Council and Hinckley and Bosworth Council. Is that all correct?
It is.
I'm grateful. Mr. Jackson, if I may, I'd like to start with the terminology used by Mr. Lally in his main proof of evidence about the site and the characterisation of the site as a strategically important location. Can you just give me your view? How do you consider, what can you take from Mr. Lally's evidence about how he has arrived at that view?
Well, to be 100% honest, I'm not entirely sure how he's come about the view. I mean, to determine that it's a strategically important location, to me, that would have seemed to be founded upon certainly a landscape or some sort of landscape analysis. And clearly, he's, quite clearly, he hasn't gone about any sort of landscape analysis or study. So I think he's I'm not sure. Having read his proof of evidence, I believe that he may have simply drawn upon his thoughts and views on the landscape sensitivity study and the Sheila. But to me, it's, if you're going to make that sort of suggestion, then I would expect it to be founded upon some sort of proper landscape analysis.
That's helpful. And in terms of proper landscape analysis, Mr. Jackson, can you just, by reference to GLVIA 3 or GLEVA, depending on how you prefer to reference it, can you just give us an overview on how one should approach taking into account landscape setting in scheme design and how landscape character assessment is or isn't relevant to that process? Okay,
well, I think to try and keep it fairly brief, I mean, GLVIA is effectively almost the Bible for landscape professionals, and that sets out quite clearly how you go about assessing schemes in terms of new development proposals coming forward. Certainly published landscape character assessments are a very important part of that process. They're very much a sort of first step, so any sort of published landscape studies are your sort of first go-to in terms of trying to understand the broad context and get a strategic overview of a site and its context. I mean, we've got a number of those studies in this instance, but as GLVIA quite clearly points out, you need to approach those critically, you need to review those. Some are outdated, some are probably more strategic than others, so they're very much a start point, and probably the important thing is that they're they don't sort of mean that you cannot carry out a sort of site-specific and detailed analysis yourself in due course.
And just in terms of, you said that you have to approach them critically. Could you just go to paragraph 5.13 on page 77 of GLVIA and just explain how that fits in, please?
Yeah, I mean, as it says here at 5.13, existing assessments, you review them critically as your start point. So you need to you need to understand what scale they're undertaken at. Some are very broad brush, some are quite dated these days. So you need to look at when they were undertaken, the purpose of those studies. I think the bullet points at 5.13, the bullet points that are overleaf,
Yeah.
I mean, they clearly set out, what you should be looking for at that stage. And that's certainly, in this instance, that's certainly the way we've gone about the study in terms of the LVIA that was submitted with the application.
That's very helpful, thank you. And just in respect of your point about it doesn't mean that you don't carry out site-specific assessment. If I could just ask you to advise us on what paragraph 5.16 on page 79 of Glivia tells us about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of reiterates the point. I mean, it makes it quite clear that even if there are useful and relevant existing landscape studies, it's still likely that you're going to be necessary to carry out specific and more detailed surveys, and that's certainly the case in this instance. And I think it's certainly the case if you look at the studies that have been produced, including the landscape sensitivity study. That was very clear in terms of its methodology, that it was no substitute for more detailed field and site-specific surveys. But I mean, again, as part of the process, they're a very useful starting point, and they provide that useful context. It enables you to understand what the likely issues are going to be, but again, on the back of that, you then need to do your more detailed assessment work.
And just in terms of how Mr. Lally's approached it, I mean, you've already said that you're not entirely sure how he's got to where he's got to on the strategically important point. But in terms of the overall approach, given that Mr. Lally hasn't done anything that would resemble a landscape and visual impact assessment, what's your view on how he can then go on to conclude whether or not the scheme fails to respond or integrate to its landscape setting?
Yeah, I think that's what I find most difficult, is the fact that there's the reference to particularly the landscape setting point, and the fact that the scheme isn't responding to the landscape setting. I mean, certainly when you're looking at landscape setting, landscape context, either at an immediate scale or a broader scale, clearly you need to understand that landscape. So you need to understand the characteristics, the features that are of value in there. You need to understand whether it is a valued, whether it's, what sort of value, or whether it's a valued landscape. You need to understand those sensitivities of that landscape. And I'm not sure if he's not undertaken a landscape, any sort of landscape sort of assessment himself, I'm not quite sure how he can go about
that. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Just a follow-up point on that then. Would, in your view, reliance on the commentary in the SHELAR or the sensitivity study, would that be sufficient?
No, certainly not. I mean, the sensitivity study is very clear that it's strategic, broad brush. I mean, in terms of the SHELAR, I mean, what I can say again, it's this reviewing and critically reviewing studies that have been produced. What I would say in terms of the SHELAR is that, the SHELAR was undertaken by a landscape professional, so it was a landscape professional that undertook that, and that was more of a site-related or site-specific study. But that's also quite clear in its outcome. So in terms of the SHELAR, the final judgment from the landscape officer there was that this was a site that, in the sort of traffic light terms of red, amber, green, in landscape terms, it scored green. And I think again, it's quite clear in terms of the points that are made in the SHELAR that this is a site and a landscape that's got the ability to accommodate proposed developments such as we've got with this scheme.
And just moving to the landscape and visual appraisal that was carried out for the site, Mr. Jackson, at CD 1.38, we went to this with Mr. Lally, and you were in the room at the time, but if I can just ask you to turn up the views that were taken into account as part of the visual assessment, which of course is different from landscape character, and paragraphs 5.37, 5.38 and viewpoint 1. With that in mind, what's your view about whether views from Wyreston Road were taken into account?
Yes, well, as part of the assessment, Wyreston Road was taken into account. I mean, again, it's referenced 537, 538. You have the viewpoint number 1 that's included at the back. Wyreston Road is also down as a receptor, so it has been taken into account. And in terms of any more distant views from Wyreston Road, I mean, what I'd say there is that, you know, we've now seen on the back of the visualisations that are in my subsequent rebuttal note that, you know, we're talking about one field gate access where there may be a glimpsed view to part of the scheme. So in terms of any visual effects, you know, we're quite clear that there's no significant visual effects upon users of Wyreston Road, be that at the entrance or be that from the south of the A52.
I mean, and to what extent, as part of a landscape visual assessment, Mr. Jackson, does Gleaver tell us that we have to sort of cover off every possible view?
You don't have to do every, you know, you'd be going forevermore in terms of every sort of glimpse of a scheme. Gleaver is quite clear that it needs to be proportionate. Our scheme certainly, our assessment's certainly been proportionate in this instance. You know, we've got a selection of representative views. I think we've probably got 8 photo viewpoints within the study. I mean, they deal with, you know, all of the main visual receptors and the likely effects upon those receptors. So again, it's you know, there's been no criticism at any point that we've missed any viewpoints or the methodology was wrong. You know, we've gone about it in accordance with Gleaver, and I think, you know, it's a robust assessment that picks up all, you know, the sensible arrangement of representative views.
I mean, and to what extent has the further assessment work that's been undertaken in response to Mr. Lally's extra viewpoints, to what extent has that had any material impact on the previous assessment, Mr. Jackson?
No material impact at all. I think it just reinforces, I think when you're, probably the wrong word, but, you know, not scratching around, but when you're sort of almost trying to find, you know, points where a scheme may be visible, it sort of, to me, it can intimate that really in terms of any visual impacts and visual effects, you know, they're not that great in the first instance if you're really searching out and trying to find positions. And I mean, in this instance, I mean, from Wyreston Road, it's, you know, there's, you know, we've got a glimpse view of a part of the scheme in a settled view. It's, you know, as I say in my rebuttal note, it's no more than a negligible effect.
And what about this issue in terms of failing to respond to landscape setting that was raised today by Mr. Lally in terms of what that viewpoint shows us? So let's just actually turn up your rebuttal for a moment so that we are being specific. So it's CD 7.31. And I believe it's figure 9. In first instance, and obviously we have figure 10 with additional maturation of planting. But I think my note of Mr. Lally's evidence in chief is that he considered that the sort of the linear arrangement was somehow problematic or didn't integrate the landscape, didn't respond to landscape setting. Can I just have your view on that, please?
Well, I certainly don't concur with that view. I mean, certainly, I mean, if you are praising it in terms of this view, I mean, you've got no idea that it may even be a sort of linear sort of arrangement in terms of the development. So I think to suggest that from this point you know you're going to read the development as a linear sort of layout isn't correct. And I think even from other any other sort of surrounding vantage points, I mean, the scheme it works well with the local landform in terms of the way the access road from Wyreston Road goes down the slopes from sort of east to west. It sort of doesn't go down the steepest part. It essentially follows a logical route in landscape terms. And I think that the existing buffer planting that sort of lines the northern side of the A52 is also pretty notable in terms of integrating and assimilating the development proposal. So, it won't be read in those sort of terms.
Thank you. And then there was a reference made for the first time today about the venue, which I think we can see from IQ8, I'm going to get the number wrong again, the Google image, it's sort of further down, isn't it, from the golf club itself. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Mr. Lally obviously made a comment about that in evidence in chief. You were in the room. Can I just understand any response you might have to that, please, Mr. Jackson?
I mean, so in terms of the venue, the LVIA included representative viewpoints. So I think in this instance, where the venue sits, which I believe is alongside the bowls club, I think the venue and the bowls club are at the same location, is my understanding. I mean, it's in terms of the nature of the view, depending on what you can see from where, we have viewpoint 6 as a sort of generally representative view within the LVIA. So in CD 1.38, we have viewpoint 6. Now, whilst I haven't been to the venue myself, I mean, I am aware, even from just looking at, the Google view, that, if we're talking about any views from within that building, it looks to be arranged on a sort of almost a north-south axis with any window essentially facing east and west. So I'm more than happy to go and have a look at it on the ground as part of the accompanied site visit. I wouldn't be surprised if there's no views at all from the venue, but even if there is, what I would say is that our scheme is going to be still a minor component part of a view that's characterised by settlement with properties, existing residential properties sitting above the scheme, existing properties to the east and west of the scheme, and with it sitting in a sort of well-treed immediate setting. So any views if there are any views, again, it just needs keeping into some sort of proportion and context, that it's part of a settled view and a pretty characteristic and fairly minor component part of that view.
And just in terms of, I think Mr. Lally was saying that, it's an attractor, so people will go down Wyerston Road more and to the golf course and the access track more in order to access the venue. But if that is indeed the case, what do you consider to be the relevance of any additional attractors going in that direction, and in terms of any appreciation they may or may not have of the site?
Well, I think, they will, as I said, they will see the site. I mean, the views probably across towards our site are different from when you're travelling on that access track that leads to the venue and the golf course. So you have got relatively more open views than from Wyerston Road. But again, Wyerston Road is the public highway. I think we're talking about effectively almost like a private track that accesses the venue. I mean, people walking down there will have views across, but again, the views, you'll see the development as a fairly minor component part of a characteristic settled view. It won't be, we're not introducing new built development into an area that hasn't already got the built development. Any perimeter fencing will be substantially screened by the existing planting on the northern side of the A52. So I'm not quite sure where Mr. Lally's going with increased, almost footfall along the road. I do agree with him. We did see 3 people walking along the road when we were there last Friday. I mean, I don't know how many people use the road. I mean, there's no footpaths, I don't think, to either side of it. I'm sure people do use it to walk to the golf club or the bowls club or the venue, but I don't know in terms of numbers.
I'm grateful, Mr. Jackson. Just moving on then away from views, just in terms of can you just give the inquiry your view, please, on the landscape proposed scheme for this development, whether you consider that to be high quality design in landscape terms, and do please tell us about trees.
I mean, in my view, it is high quality. It's appropriate, which is the important thing. It's characteristic. Clearly, there's been quite a lot of joined-up thinking, not just from the landscape side of things, but with the biodiversity and ecology professionals as well as the urban design professionals. I think Mr. Lally agreed that clearly 56% of the site is going to be dedicated to green infrastructure, which is a substantial quantity. Certainly, in my experience, that's more than is typically the situation with housing development. So 56% is a good proportion. In terms of the existing site, we're losing, there's a minimal, what I would say is a minimal loss of hedgerows and trees, and a substantial gain in terms of the numbers of hedgerows and trees. Yes, we're providing, whatever it was, 2,497 new sort of trees as such. Yes, there'll be a mix of sizes. I think Mr. Lally's correct in interpreting the plan that there's 110 individual sort of heavy standard trees that were planted on their own, but beyond that there's another 2,000, whatever it is, 2,300 that are planted as part of a sort of woodland mix or a woodland edge mix. So they go in it with different heights and sizes and will grow on to be mature trees. So, and then beyond that, there's a significant proportion of meadow grassland and grassland that is, I suppose, in biodiversity terms, if I can say it, a lot richer than is there at present. So, you know, I suppose it's a fully integrated landscape scheme that's come forward that is founded upon what's there on site at the moment in terms of local indigenous species. So again, just the connection back to the landscape character assessment, that sets out a series of species that are appropriate for this area. This mix of planting is effectively founded upon the mix of species that you see in there. So again, it's all sort of ties together in a sort of joined up way, and it'll deliver valuable sort of localised benefits in the longer term.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. If I could ask you quickly to pick up CD 5.4, please, which is the SPD for landscape character and design, if you've got that available to you.
I can put it. Yes.
Just a couple of points on this. Well, can you just explain what is this document? What's its purpose?
I mean, this is a document just to assist in terms of guiding you in terms of how landscape character and landscape sort of design and landscape design matters should be taken into account in terms of developing proposals such as we've got in front of us here. So I think it sets a sort of context to how you can draw upon the relevant studies.
And if we just go firstly then to page 25. And you'll see at the top there on the left column, green infrastructure. Can you just help us out with, does this scheme, in your opinion, this scheme fulfil what the guidance is telling us we need to do with respect to green infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the important thing with green infrastructure is that it is this sort of multifunctional, or it has these multifunctional aims. So it's not just about landscape character. It does draw upon biodiversity, even sustainable drainage. There are other elements to it.
And then if we could have a look.
While we're on that page, can I ask a question?
You can.
Yep.
Of course.
So under green infrastructure, where we were, on page 25, well-designed green infrastructure can, and then there's bullet points. And I'm just interested in the fourth one there. It was raised by Mr. Lally, these sort of spaces behind rear garden fences, where the garden doesn't quite go up to the boundary. So you've got sort of green space there. Could you give me an opinion if I was considering trying to reduce crime, fear of crime, antisocial behaviour? just an opinion on those sort of spaces that are behind rear boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, Mr. Carr may pick up on this in due course, but I think what we've got, if you look at the layout, is that there's a mix. That there are places clearly where there's boundary fencing that does obviously back onto where we have got some public sort of open space. But what I would say is that that's interspersed with, the sort of more open areas where you've got the properties and dwellings fronting out. So what I would say is that where you have got those spaces, and I think Mr. Lally characterised them as quite narrow spaces in certain instances, again, we would, in terms of the landscape proposals that would be going in, we've got appropriate sort of woodland edge planting going in there. And I think if you work your way around the site in terms of where we've got those spaces, I think where you've got that, where there is any sort of fencing, it's generally in those areas that either back onto other properties, or it backs onto pretty close to the existing buffer planting to the south. So, but like I say, but I think it's also quite interwoven. So there's quite a lot of more open areas that are sort of, in terms of natural surveillance, where you've got that natural surveillance. So I don't see that it's, it's not this, I don't think it's characterised as sort of, long lengths of boundary fencing where, you're creating some sort of no man's land or something, some sort of land that's not going to be utilised at all. Does that make sense? I think there's a mix as you go around. I think, and I think that's often the way. I think that's often the case in most instances, that there are places, particularly where you're bordering existing sort of woodland and existing sort of roadside buffer planting. That's quite often the case.
Just moving on to the actual boundary treatment approach. Obviously, there's been a number of criticisms about close bordered fencing, and I just want to see if you can help the inquiry with that. So there's a comment or a section on boundary treatment on page 25, section 2, but there's also a more substantial part of the guidance that deals with fencing. Page 35 and 36, and over at 36 we've got section 3 that deals with fencing. Can you help the inquiry with, how are those parts of this guidance relevant, and how does the scheme respond?
Well, I think just generally in terms of the boundaries, clearly we've got a mix of boundaries around the site, and there is that sort of mix, like I say, of sort of green space coming in to almost to the roadside and sort of filtering in and connecting in, so that it's it's punctuated and that you've got that connectivity across. Just looking at, I think this sort of shows or demonstrates that there are different treatments, and I think clearly we've got walls, we have got hedges, we've got the fences. So I think we accord with, I think, the approach that's sort of set out here in terms of the nature of the boundary treatments that we've got across the site.
And just in respect of how planting is or isn't relevant, and what's proposed for this scheme, can you help us out with that particular point, please?
Yeah, well, I think planting is all part of it. In places we've clearly got sort of hedgerows. They're probably more concentrated towards the western part of the site, where there's probably a bit more green space and it's a little bit more open, so there's probably more hedges down the western part of the site. But again, we've also got planting that's going to, certainly in terms of any views towards the close bordered fencing, that sort of will filter and increasingly sort of screen any sort of views, if there are views, to the surrounding fencing. So again, the planting helps to, well, A, the planting forms boundaries in its own right in places, and B, it helps to assimilate any fences and other boundaries that may arise across the development.
And then again, on page 26 of the guidance, Mr. Jackson, we can see that there's a section there on roads, spine and arterial roads, access roads, and so on and so forth. Again, same question really. What's the guidance telling us about the relevance of those in landscape terms, and how does this scheme addressed those points.
So this is 26, did you say, sorry?
It's page 26, yeah. So it starts over on page 25 at the bottom. There's a header of access and circulation, then we go over the page and we see a header of roads, and then down again spine and arterial roads, and then access roads.
Yeah, well, again, we're sort of, aligning ourselves with, the scheme does very much what it sort of advocates here. I mean, it's, looking down the road, in terms of street trees, anyway, I mean, I counted up, I think we've got 49 sort of trees as you go down the road, in terms of what's shown on the landscape proposals plan. Yes, they do almost go from one side to the other, and probably more often than not, one side or the other. But I think anybody using the road or coming into the site or walking into the site is going to see a well-treed street. And very much just in terms of page 26 of the guide here, we're very much, the sort of figure 3 scenario and the bottom tick and the tick on the bottom of figure 4 in terms of the approach that's been adopted.
Can I ask a question about street trees? Do you know, is there a reason, if we were to take tree line to mean predominantly trees lining
Yep.
road, is there a reason why we do have gaps? And is there the possibility of putting more trees in along the main street?
I mean, well, what I would say is I think sometimes you've got to be a bit careful about, I think with street trees, depending on what your sort of, I suppose, your overall sort of design approach is about being too regular for one thing. I mean, I think in certain instances, having that even avenue, having an avenue of trees at regular spacings is the right approach. I think in other places, having a more, and probably where you are sort of more settlement edge or related to a country, where you're next to the countryside, having something that is more, I suppose, randomly spaced, but still having, that to a degree, continuity, or, even if they are interspersed at irregular spacings, I think can be the right approach. I think what we've got to avoid is, just taking the view that, everything needs to be, street trees need to be both sides of the road and at regular intervals, because they're everywhere the same, and I don't think that's the right approach. I think in this instance we've got the right approach. I mean, as you go down the road, I think you might, I can't try to remember now, I think you might find there's a probably the biggest break in terms of any continuity as you move towards the west. But all I would say is that anybody using that road or going down that street, you're looking down the road, you're looking down the street, you're going to see trees all the way down and all the way back. So, yeah, in certain instances, having regularly spaced trees that are fully continuous, can be the right approach, but I don't think that has to be everywhere. And I think in this instance, we have got, this is a tree-lined street without doubt, in my mind. And if we've got a bit of a break, there's a bit of a break. I mean, in terms of other opportunities to try and fill that break in, I'm not 100% sure. That might be for others, that might be for Mr. Carr to confirm. Yep.
Thank you, ma'am. So we just find where I am in my questions. I don't think we're too far off really being finished with your evidence in chief, Mr. Jackson, actually, because I was going to go to the tree line point, and we've beaten me to the punch on that one. Just one final point, really, I think, on the landscape character assessment. So it's CD 6.26, if you need the reference, I think. Oh no, CD 6.27. In answers to questions already, you've told us about the recommendations for planting. and you've said that the proposed scheme deals with those recommendations and respects those recommendations. I think that's the note I've got of your evidence on that. With respect to Mr. Lally's point about materials and appearance, obviously again you've been in the room, I think, listening to Mr. Lally's evidence, and previously you've been watching via the live stream. Can you help us with what the landscape character assessment does or doesn't say about the need to use particular types of materials, and what's your response overall to Mr. Lally's position, please?
Well, I think what I'd say is, almost back to where we started in terms of how you interpret and use the published studies. What I'd say is that your landscape character assessment, certainly in this instance, in terms of the Derbyshire County one at 6.27, it's dealing with some large areas, and in this instance, certainly where you're dealing with the settled farmlands landscape type, that's covering an extensive area that stretches from the southern edge of Ashbourne across to Derby and then south to Sudbury and almost the county boundary. So it's a very large area, which is principally, I suppose, away from any sizable settlements. Now, in those areas, I think what it does, it suggests the predominant building material, which is the sort of warm red brick and Staffordshire blue clay tile. Yeah, it makes that clear that that's predominant. I think, again, this is where you've got to, I suppose, draw upon it, but draw upon it in a sort of almost that broad strategic sense. But more clearly, what's relevant here is, what's immediately in the surrounds to the site and the developments, the immediate context. And again, I think if everything was sort of warm red brick with Staffordshire blue clay tiles in that immediate context, then you might say that is what's that's prevalent in the immediate context. I don't think that is the case here. So again, I think you can't just sort of say that should be used everywhere, because that would be wrong. And it's, in this instance, it's more akin to the smaller villages and settlements that are far more removed from the edge of Ashbourne.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Is there anything else that you'd like to draw attention to the inquiry before I hand you over for cross-examination?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Sorry, can I just ask one more question? Do you know, Mr. Jackson, so we've got this large area of space that's going to be landscaped. Do you know how it's going to be managed?
I must admit, I think it might be for Mr. Carr. I presume there'll be some sort of management company or something set up. Ordinarily it's a management company, but
is that in the legal agreement or?
I think it's in the 106, ma'am.
Okay.
Shown as adoptable areas in the adoptable areas plan as well.
So that means adopted by some sort of land.
I think at the moment they're shown in a colour that indicates they will be adopted by the management company.
Okay.
There are three, so I can't put my hands on the plan. There are three different colours in the index, and one's adoptable highway, one's what's going to be conveyed, there's like a buff colour, and then the rest of it is management company, as I understand the position, but it is dealt with in the draft 106.
Yeah, we can come back to that then. Thank you. Okay, would you like to cross-examine?
Good afternoon, Mr. Jackson.
Good afternoon.
Fortunately not as hot and sunny as it was when we met on Friday. Right, can I ask you some questions first about your involvement in this case? Your consultancy prepared the LVA, which we have at CD 1.38, is that right?
That's correct.
Were you the author of it or involved in it?
I wasn't involved with it. It was, in fact, it was a fellow senior director, so it was a senior director that undertook the original LVIA, but it wasn't myself.
Okay, so you weren't involved in the design process, whatever landscape input it might have involved?
That's correct. My involvement, just to be clear, my involvement started when Mr. Lally's proof first came in, and my fellow senior director was away on holiday and there was a need to respond quickly to the issues that had been arisen, and I visited the site immediately, and that's when my involvement started. So it's all very recent.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. You've obviously read it. You don't disagree with any of its contents, I assume?
Correct, yeah.
And is this right? Other than the issue about the views from Wyeston Road, which you say rose last Friday, neither your rebuttal nor your rebuttal note purport to introduce any new issues or add anything material to the contents of the LVA. So you don't depart from it and you don't add to anything in it, other than in relation to the view from Wyeston Road.
I think in terms of my rebuttal, I don't think I've added or amended anything in terms of the conclusions or what's stated in the LVA. I mean, my rebuttal probably draws upon the LVA, but was principally focused upon the issues that were being raised by Mr. Lally.
That's what I was going to say. So if we see in your rebuttal, you say at 2.5 and 2.6, this has been prepared to respond to what you said was Mr. Lally's allegation of landscape harm in his original proof of evidence. That was the reason for your rebuttal, for you being instructed to prepare it and for its submission.
Correct.
There wasn't any other reason or justification for your rebuttal. That was the sole justification.
Yes, because as I was aware, there was no reason for refusal relating to landscape or visual matters, and it had been agreed in the statement of common ground that there was no landscape and visual harm. So it was purely upon the issues being introduced by Mr. Lally.
Okay, so if you had not, or if the appellant and you had not understood Mr. Lally to make an allegation of landscape harm, you wouldn't have been instructed to prepare that rebuttal?
I don't believe so, yeah.
Thank you. Similarly, in relation to your rebuttal note that we received last week, that was prepared to respond to what you say at 1.2 of the rebuttal note was Mr. Lally's raising new evidence last Friday in relation to views from Wyeston Road, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, it followed Mr. Lally's evidence on the Friday morning when it was drawing upon, the views from Wyeston Road. I think obviously the inquiry was adjourned, and again, I made myself available to meet Mr. Lally straight away and to try and address those viewpoints.
So that, again, that was the sole justification for that. If it hadn't been for that, your rebuttal note wouldn't have been produced.
I believe that's correct, yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think there has to be one caveat now made in relation to your oral evidence, though. You just touched upon the issue of whether the development is tree-lined. It's right to say, isn't it, that isn't found anywhere in any of your written evidence. You don't touch on that issue, whether it's tree-lined within the meaning of MPPF paragraph 136.
I don't touch that upon my evidence. I was asked a question. I answered the question. I'm aware that Mr. Carr will be addressing it anyway, so I just gave my opinion, my professional opinion.
Okay, and I understand you asked the question. I'm not going to make a big song dance about it, but I want to know who I need to direct my questions to on it, though, because I was going to ask Mr. Carr about it. So can I ask you this? Am I right to think that it having been dealt with in Mr. Carr's evidence, it's a matter when it comes to whether or not the development complies with MPPF paragraph 136, I should put to him or Mr. Bassett rather than yourself?
Well, yeah, either of those two rather than myself. I think that's fair.
Because I need to talk about the meaning of tree-lined and so on. But those are questions for them rather than for you. Do you accept? Are you happy with that, or I'll put them to you if you wish?
I'm happy with that.
Okay, thank you. Right. Okay. Can I turn then the first question then, the issue dealt with in your first rebuttal, Mr. Lally, and the question of landscape harm. You say in your rebuttal, this is 2.5, perplexed that Mr. Lally alleges harm to the landscape and townscape character and landscape setting, given the reasons for refusal and what was in the statement of common ground. Can we start with this? There is a distinction between something being, or evidence raising landscape issues and evidence alleging landscape harm. That's not the same thing. Something can raise landscape issues without alleging landscape harm. Agreed?
Agreed.
And do we agree also that it's a fallacy to say something is either a design issue or a landscape issue. Some issues can be both. There can be overlap between the two.
I think it's probably fair that certainly one leads into the other, or vice versa.
And in fact, we know that there must be, because the NPPF tells us that a crucial element of good design is relating development to its landscape and townscape setting. So that's a key element of good design that requires consideration, landscape issues to be taken into account.
It does, yeah, but to do that, you need to understand the landscape. So, your starting point for doing that process is to understand the existing landscape that you're dealing with.
Okay, understand. So, but we agree, therefore, that there is nothing wrong in principle with a person giving evidence on design issues, asking themselves, does this development relate well to its surrounding landscape and townscape? That is a perfectly proper thing within the ambit of such a witness's evidence.
I think that, yeah, a witness should be doing that, but it's important that what he's drawing upon, he's drawing upon a sound knowledge base, or he's drawing upon others that do have that sound knowledge base.
Okay. And, okay. So the issue then is, it follows, doesn't it? The issue is, there's nothing wrong with Mr. Lally raising landscape issues insofar as they are relevant to the design issues, which he is addressing. The issue, and then what you allege in your rebuttal, is that he has alleged an adverse impact on landscape character and setting, I think you say.
Yeah, I think that's the point here. It's
okay.
Like I say, he says in his, he says that he's not taking he doesn't do a landscape character assessment. I think in Appendix B of his revised proof, I think it says that he doesn't deal with landscape character, but he must deal with landscape character if he's trying to suggest there is a landscape character impact here.
But that's why I just agreed the distinction with you. There's no dispute that Mr. Lally refers to landscape character areas, landscape character types and particular issues within the documents that we've been taken through. The question isn't whether he's referred to landscape issues, he undoubtedly has. The question is whether or not he's alleged landscape harm, which was the explicit justification for your rebuttal proof. And so I want to come straight to that. Can I go to your rebuttal proof, please? Paragraph, just so we're clear what's alleged, 2.13. Sorry, 2.5, I beg your pardon.
2.5?
Yeah, sorry. So, yeah, so 2.5, that's where I've taken this from. So, let's know landscape visual evidence originally advanced by the appellant. Somewhat perplexing, the council evidence when Mr. Lally's design evidence now appears to be alleging harm to the landscape character and landscape, including townscape character and landscape setting. But would you take me to which bit of Mr. Lally's evidence you say does that? I mean, I can start with, to be fair to you, if we go to Mr. Lally's proof, the bit I think that the appellant objects to is which starts at 4.11, page 7, which is certainly the bit that talks about visibility from Wyerstone Road.
Well, I think isn't there three sort of points that he sort of heads things up under? One is landscape setting, and is that not that to me?
Well, he says relationship to landscape setting. So that what he's saying, I'm looking at the relationship of the development to the landscape setting, and if you go on to 415, his conclusion is expressed in the last sentence. As explained below, in my opinion, the site proposals fail to make the site's relationship to both the landscape character of the wider countryside and townscape character a key component of design. So he says there isn't a good relationship between landscape character and townscape character, and it hasn't been made a key component of design. Now, no doubt your client and possibly yourself disagree with that, but that is not an allegation of landscape harm. That's a criticism of the design because of the relationship or lack thereof between landscape character and the development, isn't it? It's not
Well, my reading of it was that he was alleging that there was certainly an issue here with landscape character, in so much as the scheme wasn't related, or wasn't sort of born of the.
That's entirely right. That's entirely is what he's doing. But what I'm saying is, what he doesn't do is say, ergo, I allege that there is harm to the surrounding landscape from this. He says this just isn't well related in design terms. There isn't.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, can I just put it to you? Take you to that part. There isn't any part, as far as I'm aware, where he says explicitly or implicitly there is harm to the landscape as a result of this development.
No. I mean, to me, whether it's just implied then, but the way I read it is that he says that, or he's saying that the scheme doesn't relate well to the character of the landscape, and to me, if that's what's being said, even if ultimately his conclusion is there's no harm in landscape character terms. I mean, I think most people might suggest that if it isn't relating well to landscape character, that might be assumed that there might be some harm to landscape character. But if it's the case that he's saying that it's not well related to the existing landscape character, but the result is there's still no landscape, there's no harm to landscape character, if that's his conclusion, then that wasn't certainly the way I'd read his evidence.
No, but reading it, to be fair, obviously you had some time to look at it now. Once read fairly and with the benefit of a bit more time to consider it, there is, I mean, what I'm asking you, this is your opportunity to say, if I'm wrong about that, please tell me where the part of his evidence where we can see clearly he is alleging landscape harm, not simply saying the relationship between landscape and the development and townscape is not a good one.
I mean, the way I read it is he's raising landscape character issues because he's saying that the scheme doesn't relate well to the landscape character of the existing sort of site and its context. Yeah. So that to me is a landscape character matter. I mean, I must admit, I'm not sure whether I missed it, but if he says at the end of the day in his evidence that there's no harm in landscape character terms, maybe that arising from the scheme, then maybe I've missed that. But my take from his evidence is that he is saying there's an issue with the scheme, the way the scheme relates to the landscape character of the site and its context.
Agreed. What he's not saying, and this is the last time we're going to ask it, what he's not saying is there is landscape harm arising from that. He doesn't say either way, you're quite right, he doesn't say there isn't any landscape harm either. He simply says nothing about it, about that. Agreed?
I can't see in his evidence that he said that there is harm in landscape character terms. Okay. But like I say, he raises issues in landscape character terms, which is what I've addressed.
Yeah, but he's entitled to do that. We agreed that. That's what he has to do in order to apply the MPPF. Okay, but it follows from that there is no, there is no justification for your rebuttal proof of evidence. The sole justification was to respond to an allegation that hasn't been made.
Sorry, Mr. Hunter, is this helpful with the reasons for refusal, or is it more of a cost thing?
No, it may have cost implications, but the sole focus of that proof of evidence was to attack Mr. Alali's evidence on a specific point, which is why I think I have to put it to this witness that the central, indeed exclusive criticism that's made is misconceived.
Well, I don't accept that. I mean, like I say, I take it from the point of view that, I mean, again, if we go back to his reference to strategically important location, now that as well is from my reading of his evidence, that's born of a landscape character, a landscape sensitivity issue as well. So I think that there are quite clearly, landscape character matters here that he has raised, and I think that's the reason for my rebuttal evidence.
Well, but that's not the reason that's stated in your rebuttal evidence. That's why I said there's a distinction between landscape issues being raised and allegations of landscape harm being raised. The explicit justification given was an allegation of landscape harm. I think you're not contending that there is such an allegation now. Okay, can I deal with the second one and I'll move on to that rather?
Sorry, I'm not sure that Mr Jackson had a chance to answer the question there.
Well, I'm recapping where we got to. Mr Jackson, if you want to tell me somewhere where your rebuttal proof says, I'm here to deal with landscape issues in addition to issues of in addition to landscape harm, it doesn't say that, does it?
I mean, I'm
So-
here dealing with effectively landscape character matters on the basis of Mr Lally's evidence, which to me quite clearly raises issues that are, specifically focused upon landscape character and landscape setting.
Okay, where does it say in your rebuttal proof that the reason and justification for it was because he raised landscape issues which needed to be addressed, as opposed to landscape harm which needed to be addressed?
Is this something you want me to resolve in my decision?
No, well,
Okay.
I'm happy to move on. My learned friend asked me to put the question to the witness.
I asked you to let Mr Jackson finish because he was about to say something else.
Okay. I was expecting more just cross-examination of the evidence.
Well, ma'am, can I just be clear about
And
that?
the reasons why things came in as rebuttals.
The evidence was put in because it was said, I'm repeating myself, ma'am, but the evidence was put in for the exclusive reason that it was alleged that Mr Lally alleged landscape harm. We've gone through that. The council is not advancing a landscape visual impact impact case. So on the substance of of the LVIA and Mr Jackson's evidence, there's going to be very little that I'm going to ask, because I would be going beyond the council's reason for refusal. So I don't intend to ask anything which would amount to a landscape and visual impact case. I'm going to clarify certain things that might have relevance elsewhere, but that's all I'm going to do, just to be clear. I'm going to challenge the judgments that have been reached at the end of everything, because it's not part of our case.
I understand it's not part of your case, and the appellant is entitled to, this is why we're hearing stuff about ecology potentially, is appellants put their best cases forward, and if you've got any questions, you can challenge it.
Yeah.
But I understand you haven't got a witness, so that's what I was expecting from this session. So forgive me, I'm just wondering where this is taking me, just in terms of whether the rebuttal is justified or not, is kind of what it sounds like to me.
It may be relevant in costs. It is just, as I said, I think I had to. Mr Lally has been cross-examined about landscape impact and harm at length over 2 days. And so I think I'm entitled to say there is no landscape impact case to that witness who has actually positively alleged that. I'd finished that section, ma'am, I have to say, and I was going to move on to the next one. But the next one, I will try and deal with it briefly, but I needed to go through it in a staged way so that I could ensure that we were understood where we were. But in relation to the second document you produced, the rebuttal note.
Yes.
Let's go to that, please. Paragraph 1.2, this rebuttal note has been prepared following the adjournment of the planning appeal on the 10th of May and following new evidence raised by Mr Lally in his cross-examination on the 10th of May. It addresses views from Wyeston Road. The issue of, well, perhaps you can tell me this. What new evidence do you say Mr Lally raised last Friday that justified the production of this note?
Well, my recollection of the oral evidence, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, is that Mr Lally was alleging that in relation to views from Wyeston Road, that there would be effectively visual impact for users of that road.
Well, I'm going to leave the inspector to look at the note, but obviously you've heard Mr Lally today. That's not my note either, so there may be a dispute on record. Mr Lally's not alleging visual impact. He said the question arose as to whether it was visible from Wyeston Road. We're agreed, so the inspector can look at the note and see whether or not Mr Lally went beyond that. If we look at his written evidence and then leave people to their notes, he's not alleging an adverse visual impact, as he's talking about the visibility of the development from Wyeston Road, as referenced in the Sheila.
In which case, okay, so if there was no suggestion of impact, there was discussion, and he was raising the issue of visibility and the extent of visibility from Wyreston Road, and that's why that's why you've got this note in front of you, because it's dealing with the extent of that visibility.
Okay.
And I think that's quite clearly focused upon that, and I think you quite clearly see from all the illustrations that it's focused upon the extent of visibility.
Well, the inspector may have to go back to her notes on this. My recollection of what happened last Friday was the appellant did not accept that the development would be visible from Wyreston Road at this junction.
Well, I don't know whether that's the case or not. I wasn't here last Friday, so no. So I don't know what my recollection. I'm aware that there was an issue with the extent of visibility, and I think that's why it was almost a clarification point. That's why we had the meeting quickly out on site. Mr. Lally was able to try and work out where the scheme might be visible from, and that's where we took the photographs.
Okay.
So as I understood it, it was almost a point that the inspector, it was just that clarification of where is it going to be visible from Wyreston Road.
Yeah, there's undoubtedly that was one of the purposes. One of the things a landscape and visual appraisal should do is identify where the development will be visible from and by which receptors, yeah?
Yes, but again, this brings me back to my proportionality. I mean, I'm happy to go through this, but if we go to the LVA CD 1.38, if you go to figure 5, which is which includes the representative visual envelope.
So we'll just bear with me a second.
Yep. Sorry.
Yep.
So again, in terms of visibility, we've got a series of representative viewpoints there. So we have got the 8, in fact, probably 9 with 2A and 2B viewpoints. There's a representative visual envelope there, which is, as it says, representative. I think if you look at it in relation to Wyreston Road, it just comes up to your field gate access.
Yeah.
I would say that, in that context, again, probably the wrong phrase, but it's bang on, that is, that's just got that in.
Okay.
So yes, but again, it's proportionality. If you miss a viewpoint that's a 1 second roadside glimpse view and it results in a negligible effect, it's not going to affect the overall outcome of your LVA.
Can I understand what the position is? Are you saying then that, just so I can understand it again, we go back to note, the LVA, when we look at this figure 5, is telling us that there is or may be views from Wyreston Road in this location?
What it's showing you, and again, there's a fair bit of small print in here, which will say there's some areas within the representative visual envelope that you might be able to see it, but equally there's some outside, so it's representative. I mean, this shows you that potentially you'll get a glimpse view. I mean, we've analysed Wyreston Road. That's why the rebuttal note's in there in terms of my most recent rebuttal note. I don't know, Mr. Lally wasn't alleging that there was any more than that one field gate access.
Can I have an answer to the question? The question was...
Just remind me of your question.
Yeah, it was a yes or no question. It was your position, what you're saying is the representative visual envelope that's denoted on this plan tells us that there are potential views from near the field gate on Wyreston Road.
Yeah. It does. It's from the field gate on Wyreston Road.
Which might beg the question why there was a dispute about it earlier, but we'll leave that for the moment. Okay. We are agreed that there are views. You've illustrated them and prepared the wireframe and a photo montage from the field gate. Yeah.
A view, not views. I wouldn't call it plural.
Okay.
A view.
And there is no dispute that the other element mentioned in the SHELAR, which was views from elsewhere in elevated locations on the southern side of the valley, that is also correct. So the contents of Mr. Lally's proof, insofar as they reference the SHELAR, namely, there are views from Wyreston Road on the southern side of the valley, or a view. And there are views from other elevated locations on the southern side of the valley, is also correct. Yeah? I just want to check there's just absolutely no disagreement that is correct.
Well, can I just check the reference in the SHELAR, please, just so that I'm sure?
If you go to Mr. Lally's main proof, paragraph 411.
Just to assist, if you want the SHELAR itself, it's...
I don't need the SHELAR, thank you. I'll stick with Mr. Lally's proof, thank you. 411, page 7.
So sorry, are you talking about Mr. Lally's proof or the Sheila? Because the Sheila's
I'm
obviously...
talking more about I'm trying to keep things simple and stick to Mr. Ali's proof so we don't open up more documents than we have to. He quotes from it, if Miss Godley wishes to re-examine on any other matter, it was liberty to do so after I've finished. The site is visible from new residential development to the north within Spittal Hall. That's true. Acorn Drive.
Sorry, just give me 1 second.
I'm sorry.
Which paragraph?
411, page 7.
Yes, okay, sorry, yeah, I've got it now.
Okay. It's visible from new residential to the north within Spittal Hall. Agreed. Acorn Drive, obvious.
The north is Spittal Hall. Yes.
And indeed identified as a major moderate to moderate adverse visual impact in the LVA, yeah?
I can just let me call it up just to be sure then, if we'd go in there as well. Yeah, residual effect moderate, yes.
Yeah. It's also identified as a major moderate adverse visual effect from Premier Avenue.
So right, okay, sorry. We're into the landscape visual impacts now, are we? Or I thought we were just...
trying. Hang on. Could you just answer my question, please? Because if I don't do it now, I'll have to come back later and it'll take a lot more time than it needs to. It would just be simple if we could agree an uncontroversial fact because it's already written down.
What was the second one, sorry, from Premier Avenue?
Premier Avenue, a major moderate adverse impact, again reducing to moderate after 15 years.
Correct.
That's the LVA. Yeah. Okay. And then going back to 411, from elevated land in the wider landscape to the southwest, such as along the approach along Wyston Road, putting in caveat possibly around whether they got their direction right and meant southwest or south or some other direction, but southerly direction. Obviously, we've identified and confirmed that there is a view from the approach along Wyston Road on elevated land to the south. That's viewpoint C.
Yes.
Yeah. And it says such as, suggesting it's only one potential viewpoint, and without, you've got your representative visual envelope which shows where potentially it could be seen from, but we can't say exactly without further analysis, correct?
Correct. If we're just saying that the site of the scheme is visible from Wyston Road. Unless I've listened to
your envelope tells us it's potentially visible from anywhere within the envelope. You have to need more detailed, fine-grained analysis to see whether it actually is visible and the extent of visibility.
Yes.
Yeah. But at the places but it's potentially visible from other places within that.
Within that representative visual envelope, yeah. I mean, across the golf course, we're aware.
And across the golf course, we know it's visible because you've taken viewpoints and you've viewed it, and it may or may not be from different other points. Thank you. Okay, so that's all agreed. Good. Can I ask you to go to your rebuttal then and look at viewpoint C?
So this is the rebuttal note.
Your rebuttal note, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Yes.
And could you, you're going to have to flip between, I don't know if you've got it in writing, it's harder for those of us working in a PDF. I want to flip between the text and the viewpoint.
All right, that's all right. Okay.
So if you've got viewpoint C, you've had a look at it, could you go back in the text to page 3, paragraphs 3.8 and 3.9?
Yes.
Okay. You say there there will be perceived as a characteristic part of an existing settled view with other existing housing more readily apparent in view. That doesn't say any more than that any housing seen within this view on this side of the hill will be seen as part of a settled landscape, does it?
Well, I think it does. I mean, firstly, it points out that it's a settled view and there's clearly existing housing visible in the view. And I think it also makes the point that the other housing will be more visible, more prominent than the proposed development.
But any development, whatever its form in here, would have elicited the same comment from you. Any housing, however poorly designed in its layout, for example, would still appear as a characteristic part of a settled view, because it's housing within a view where housing surrounded it. So it might have a poor layout, but it would still be a characteristic of a settled view.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. I mean, again, the important point is that, you know, the existing development sits above and to the sides of the proposed development, and our proposal sits well related to the existing landscape in that view.
Okay, so can I just understand that, because that might lead to something important. Your assessment of the significance of this impact and so on isn't affected by any of the design issues that Mr. Lally has obtained. You would have reached the same conclusion even if it had been designed in a different way.
No, that's not right.
Is it not right?
No, that's not right. That's not fair. Again, I mean, I think if you flick onto the view and just look at what's visible in terms of the view, we don't have any, you know, if there is an issue with close board fencing or whatever, we don't have that. I mean, the proposed development sits low in that landscape. It clearly, with the proposed planting on the sort of higher ground, certainly over time, pretty short, medium and longer term, it's going to sit even more positively in that landscape. So, you know, clearly the layout, the extent of the development within the site and its sort of design is important to the magnitude of visual change that will arise in this viewpoint.
Can I understand one bit about this, because I wasn't sure about this bit at the end where it said the effective mitigation after 15 years will be beneficial. So
This is in my note.
In your note still.
Yeah.
So we're on page 3 going over to page 4, 312. So you say it will be visible. I just want to understand what you're saying first of all, and then we'll look at it.
Yeah, okay. So
are you saying any visual effect will be beneficial, albeit limited, given the limited presence of proposals within the viewpoint? Are you saying that the view will be improved from the baseline view that we have now? So there will be a beneficial, positive visual impact or visual effect? Or are you simply saying the mitigation will have the landscape mitigation will have a positive impact in mitigating the effect that the development had on construction?
No, I would be saying in terms of this view, this particular, like I said, this one field gate view, and from where we're positioned, the view will be improved. From
the view we have now?
Yeah, because of the extent of the woodland planting, the planting on the slopes, and the fact that also, not only does it provide a backdrop to our scheme, I mean, you can look at the figure 10, I think, you look at figure 10 and you look back to figure 7.
Yeah.
I mean, in my view, you're going to see more new woodland or more native planting than you will built development. And I think that new native planting across those steepening slopes up to Acorn Drive, to me, I'm not saying there's going to be a significant visual benefit, I'm just saying that there will be a beneficial effect. I think given the nature of the view, which is just a glimpse view for just a passing, fleeting view, it's not going to be anything that's more than sort of minor beneficial, but to me, that is an enhancement on the existing view.
Well, so it's better to see a view with housing along can I just agree the components of it? From this view, the housing will look like it's set down almost at the bottom of the valley, won't it? It's clearly going to be divorced from the current edge of the settlement on Acorn Drive. It's not going to appear as part of that.
Well, in the same way, I mean, again, if you're getting into looking at it in some detail, I mean, what I would say is that your Premier Avenue development that sits beyond our site, again, the planting will help to filter that. So I think almost not drawing upon exactly what Mr. Lally was talking about, but in terms of clusters or bits of development that are broken up, I think clearly what you'll have here is you'll have the housing on the highest parts of the slopes, still the most prominent, but again, some filtering beginning to arise from the proposed planting that we're introducing on the higher slopes. And also, if you look at the proportion of green space to built development, what I'm saying is there's on balance, after 15 years, I'm saying there'll be a slight minor beneficial effect.
Okay, I mean, it's a matter, obviously it's a matter of judgment for different people, but I just wanted, so you're essentially saying this, the visual amenity for receptors at this view is enhanced by seeing housing at the bottom of the slope, because there are some trees behind it.
Well, on balance, you're probably not seeing that many more houses if you take into account that we're screening some of the housing that's on Premier Avenue. So on balance, you're probably proportionally not seeing any more housing than you see at present. You're just taking away the sort of more open slopes. I mean, again, this is the whole issue of proportionality. I mean, this is a gateway view that probably nobody really takes any notice of.
Okay, we may have to agree to disagree on that then, thank you. Okay, bear with me a second. In relation to landscape character, I've just got a few points on that because there are matters that you've picked up and that Mr. Lally's been asked about. I mean, there is no, in fact, Mr. Lally, I think, may have done himself a disservice in his evidence. Could you go to it, please, page 4, paragraph 424, page 11 of his proof? Just so the inspector appreciates, I think, that there is no dispute over this in reality.
Sorry, 424, yeah.
Yeah, 424, page 11. Mr. Lally identifies the site as falling within the Needwood and South Derbyshire Claylands National Character Area. That's correct?
That's correct, yeah.
No dispute, that's what the LVA says? Yep.
Yes.
And he also says it's within the settled farmland character type. That is also correct, and that is the one that the appellant also says it falls within, correct?
That's correct, but that wasn't what Mr. Lally said. I mean, I don't know whether it says it elsewhere.
I think he gave away too much because in his text you can actually see he doesn't say settled farmland plateau, he says settled farmland. Settled farmland is correct, isn't it?
Settled farmland's correct, but the one that Mr. Lally, I don't know whether it's in his written evidence, but certainly I think in oral evidence, referred to the wrong one. He referred to the...
Yeah, and I'm saying he made the mistake in accepting he'd referred to the wrong one in his proof because he actually...
Allegation.
It's all right, I can handle this, thank you. Right. Equally, what Mr. Lally says, and I need to put it to you as the appellant's landscape witness, is within this character area, again, perhaps a small error by him, it should say character type. The report establishes that, and then he incorporates a quote. Now, that quote was taken from the wrong part of the document, I think, is what Mr. Malley should have said. But, as he said, it doesn't make any difference because the guidance is materially the same in relation to the use of mellow red brick with Staffordshire blue clay tile roofs in both places. Do you accept that? It doesn't make any difference if there was a slip between the two character types.
Sorry, and the other one says says the same thing.
Would you like to go to it?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Sure.
again, I will do, but I suppose my recollection, looking at that says almost without exception, traditional buildings are...
The other one says predominantly, I think.
Yeah, and this one also says are built of mellow red brick. I don't think the other one says mellow red brick. So I think there are differences. One's predominant.
Okay.
And one's warm red brick. Okay. So there are differences, so...
Okay. The underlying point, as he made clear as well, was, and I think you said, I think again you're actually of one mind on this, he wasn't saying you have to slavishly adhere to this and replicate the specific type that's reverted, but I think you accept it needs to be borne in mind when one is designing the development in order to assimilate it appropriately into the landscape.
I think what you do is, I try to explain, is you bear in mind clearly what the character assessment says. Now, in this context, this isn't a character assessment that's focused on a little local area around the site. This applies to a very broad area that stretches across the Derby down to the county boundary with Sudbury. So you need to have it in that context, and I think that's the important thing here, particularly with the materials and what we're talking about here.
Okay. But it's not, first of all, I don't think it's within the scope of your evidence to say how that was taken into account in the design process, is it?
It's not within the scope of my evidence. I mean, but the LVIA is clear in terms of drawing upon this character assessment. Yeah. So at that sort of stage, when I wasn't party to the design process,
that was the second
I don't
part.
know what was, I wasn't involved with it at that stage, so okay. I don't know what was discussed in terms of...
So if I ask the question, how was this taken into account in the design process? The answer is you don't know.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Would you just bear with me 1 second? Is there anything else? Thank you, Mum. Questions?
Thank you. Re-examine?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Right, thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you.
I think it's worth saying that for me anyway, the viewpoints from Wyaston Road were really helpful. So thank you for doing that at the last minute for me. I think it's useful for everyone, to be honest. Yeah, thank you. Right, now I know you've been doing the lion's share of work today. How do you feel about doing another examination in chief?
I have to say, on balance, I'd probably ask to come and do it in the morning. But at the same time, if you really want me to press on, I'll do my best.
So your preference is to leave it till tomorrow?
Yes.
Because it's been a long day.
It has been a long day.
And you want to give it your best, okay.
I think what I want to do is try and make sure it's as concise as it can be, and I suspect we'll take more time, not less, if we plough straight on. That said, I'm sure that Mr. Carr and I can rock and roll and use the rest of the day to 5 o'clock.
Can I just, is it still an hour and a half estimate?
I was going to try and cut it down to about 45 minutes, but again, whether that's really realistic at present, I'm not sure.
I mean, it's examination in chief, so it's about stuff we've already known and read.
Ma'am, I'm quite happy if we want to take a short break so that I can sort my papers out. I'm happy if you want to push
Don't
on.
want to push you though, 'cause
I don't mind.
Well, here's
the
what we've
timetable.
got. Yeah. Okay, well, Mum, I'm in your hands.
Yeah,
Just-
quite happy to have an early start,
Can
ma'am.
we just have a chat about the timetable then? So,
I can't be here before 9:30 though, or, I'll only get here shortly before, so I couldn't move that any earlier.
what, tomorrow?
Tomorrow,
Yeah.
I can't be here any
Okay.
earlier than that.
Wasn't going to suggest that. I was going to suggest 6 a.m.
Well, I might be able to, that might be easier, sometimes, as long as I can leave at 7.
Okay, how does this work? If we do Mr. Carr tomorrow, then we might be able to start drainage, and then drainage kicks over to Thursday, and we have to be out by 4. And then, but you're saying you possibly might not do ecology, possibly, if we're really lucky, might not do housing land supply.
Yes, ma'am.
So there, with a good wind, we could possibly do planning this week.
Yes.
Or it might be split over 2 weeks. We're all aware of that with our
Yeah.
planning witnesses, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, the planning witnesses
Yeah.
have the worst time because they're
They
here
do.
going through the
Yeah.
whole thing and then they're right at the end and they have to do everything that everyone else says, I'm not an expert in this. And they get messed about because of the rest of the timetable. Okay, and then that could potentially leave us. I mean, part of me wonders if we could make a start, but is that too bitty?
I think it would be, I think we either try and we go and we get it done, or not, because otherwise I think you would just lose the benefit of it.
Yeah,
If we
okay.
stop partway through, is my instinct.
I always say this to my husband, and I ought to take my own advice, that you're better to rest and do something efficiently. So that's probably what we should do rather than try and push on.
Yeah,
All right.
I mean, I think so, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Right, so we're all right. So 9:30 isn't too early tomorrow, is it?
It should be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, okay. Well, thank you. I don't think there's anything outstanding from today that I need to remind you of, so really, I'll just see you all tomorrow at 9:30 then.
Grateful, ma'am.
Thank you.